And look, to be quite honest with you, when I voted against the government at the time, I felt my political career was over. I felt that, I would never have the opportunity to become a cabinet minister, which was always my ambition. And I really seriously considered leaving politics altogether at that stage. There are times that I'd be passing through the local communities and I'd be looking at those projects, and I do still every single day smile and think about the difficulty there is in getting these projects over the line, the struggle that's involved with them.
Now that you're back under the Fine Gael banner, if I may, can I get your thoughts on the current leader, Simon Harris? I mean, you spoke earlier about how during your time you felt a lot of politicians were focused on the problem and not the solution. Do you believe that he's an exception to that? Hello and welcome to Conversations with Sam Assad. That's me, but it's not about me, it's about my guests. And today I'm joined by Denis Naughten. Denis has served as a TD, a senator, a cabinet minister, and he was one of the most prominent independent voices in Irish politics. Along the way, he became known for making bold decisions and for putting his rural constituents at the centre of his work. We talk about the highs and lows of his career, the lessons learned from public service, and his new chapter in life. So enjoy my conversation with Denis Naughten. Denis Naughten, thank you for joining me.
Thanks, Sam, for having me.
Let's start at the beginning if we can. You grew up in Drum, County Roscommon, a real community located west of Athlone. I remember coming across a quote from B.B. Baskin, a former TV and radio broadcaster, RT, for many years, where she once described Drum as being, quote, not a town nor a village, but a place apart. I suppose highlighting the Drum's unique character, if you will. How do you think your upbringing and the community that you lived in shaped you as a person?
It's funny, I never heard that quote from B.B. Baskin, but I think it describes it very well in that it is very much a rural area, roughly halfway between Athlone and Banlasloe, but there isn't a central village location. But the one thing that brings everyone together in that whole community is football. And we have the local Fine Gael football club, which represented County Roscommon in in 5 All-Ireland finals in the 1980s, lost all 5 of them, unfortunately. But, so there has always been that strong footballing tradition, and it probably has been the one piece of glue that has kept the whole community together. And the parish is actually split in that about a third of the parish is in County Roscommon, and 2/3 of the population traditionally were in County Westmeath. So my parish church was St. Peter's and Paul's Church on the bridge in Athlone, which is on the Connacht side of the River Shannon, but in County Westmeath. So I think sport and farming and rural life has been, I suppose, the backbone of the Drum community. And I suppose that's where I grew up. I grew up in a community where there was a great sense of community and loyalty to each other. If anyone ever got in difficulty, people would rally around each other. But it was also a very pragmatic community. They were self-sufficient in terms of addressing their own challenges within their community, trying to look for solutions rather than, a perception of people in rural Ireland that they're, always complaining, always looking for something, which isn't the reality of it. And that community would always have been seen as a very resilient community.
Your late father, Liam Naughten, he was a prominent Fine Gael TD in the 1980s. He was a senator as well. So you grew up in a staunch Fine Gael household. What was it like growing up in a household where I assume politics was part of daily life?
Yeah, politics was part of daily life, and I suppose there's a long history in my family. My grandfather would have fought in the War of Independence, would have been a founder member of the Fine Gael party in County Roscommon. My great grandfather would have been involved in local politics as well prior to 1900. So there was a strong tradition of being involved in the community, of representing the community down through the years. And yes, growing up in a political household during a time of, quite heated national debates and quite heated politics in terms of the politics between Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil, but also the politics locally in County Roscommon within parties both. And, there's been plenty written about the battles between Terry Laden and Sean Doherty and Fianna Fáil, and between Liam Naughten and John Connor in Fine Gael, in terms of local political battles in a number of the elections in the 1980s. So I suppose, yes, I grew up in that household. Politics was in our house from a very early time. My father was elected to Roscommon County Council in 1974. I was just 12 months old at that stage. So, look, I suppose it's something we took for granted. We were always very conscious of what was going on in current affairs. And I grew up in that house, grew up with a huge interest in current affairs and public life. And I brought that through then into when I went to college. I got involved in Young Fine Gael and got involved in student politics in UCD at the time.
And in terms of your education, you studied science at UCD, I believe, UCC. You did start a PhD in food microbiology. That's obviously a science background. I mean, not the usual route into politics. What drew you to science?
I always had a love of science, and I did 4 science subjects for my Leaving Cert. I did physics, chemistry, biology, and applied maths for my Leaving Cert. So I was always going to go into science. It also always had a huge interest in it. And I grew up in a household where my father had gone to second level school for 1 year. And he was someone that really felt strongly about taking the opportunities of education, about getting a good education, but he was never firm on what that should be in, only to get that education and to get that standard of education. But really, it was up to you to do whatever you wanted to do, whatever you were interested in. And his view on it was that if you did something that you had an interest and a like for, you'd do very well in it. And if you do very well in it, there will always be a job for you there, regardless of what profession or career you go into. But he felt very strongly about an education because he himself didn't get it. And he felt that it restricted him in his own life. And it was something that he wanted all of his family to do. So, as I say, science was my real love. And I went to UCD to study science there. I did a degree in industrial microbiology, chemistry and statistics. And I went from there then to UCD or UCC to start a PhD in food microbiology. Got involved in politics down there as well, more so in Fine Gael rather than student politics in UCC. So that was always there. Science and politics were probably my 2 great loves. And yes, I come from a very different background than most people that go into politics. A lot of them come from a legal or humanities base. Very few of us come from an engineering or science base. And I suppose that gives us a very different perspective on dealing with the challenges and issues that you face day to day as a politician.
Did you find that your love of science perhaps influence how you approached policy and problem solving in politics? For example, relying on research, relying on a lot of data.
Yes, absolutely. And I remember sitting at the Fine Gael front bench probably in around 2003. And I was really frustrated because I felt that no one could see where I was coming from. And I questioned whether, I was in the right party, whether I should stay in politics at all. And there was a huge level of frustration there at the time that, I felt that I was having very different perspectives to everyone else around that room. And one day I happened to be sitting back looking around the room, and I realised that I was the only one that wasn't humanities trained in the room. And I realised that I look at things differently. I look at problems very differently because as a scientist, you're actually trained to solve problems. That's the core basis of your scientific education. So straight away, once someone presents a problem, whether that's a constituent coming in with a problem in terms of bureaucracy with a government agency or department, or whether it's a policy challenge, straight away you're looking at it very differently. You're trying to come up with solutions. You're running ideas through your head about, well, could this work, or potentially could this work? Whereas I think people that are humanities trained tend to focus more on the problem first of all, rather than focusing on the solutions. And I would say that in a lot of cases, they would look at the solution at a one-dimensional level, that they would see an approach forward and take that approach, and it was either all or nothing. Whereas I think if you're trained as a scientist, you're always continually thinking about solutions. So if there's a roadblock taking one particular policy approach, then you'll always look for another alternative in relation to that. And I found myself in politics, when I'd be developing policy and putting forward policy proposals, if I came up against a roadblock, I'd go back and I'd recalculate and I'd revise that policy proposal and go again at it. And I remember a piece of advice that I got very early on in politics from the late Sean Doherty, who was a constituency colleague of mine. And I was going down the corridor in Leinster House one day, and he literally grabbed me by the collar of the shirt and he pulled me back and he said, "Young man, can I give you a piece of advice?" He said, "Politics is a marathon, not a sprint." And it has always stood to me, because even this week now we had young people, undergraduate students in Leinster House. They've spent 12 months doing their undergraduate studies in terms of a research report that they were presenting to the politicians. And they spent 4 years in college. They have spent 12 months doing this particular piece of study, looking for a policy impact. And I explained to them, don't expect this to happen overnight. It's taking you 4 years to get to where you are today. You cannot expect that the policy that will be delivered on foot of that will happen overnight. Policy development takes time. It takes persistence. And even today now, there's an announcement by the government in relation to a grant for refurbishing vacant homes. They're increasing the grants that are available in relation to refurbishing empty properties. That's a proposal that I took to Owen Murphy nearly 7 years ago. Darragh O'Brien was the minister that took it on board. The initial concept that we brought through in relation to the proposal ran into the ground. There wasn't a huge success in relation to it. Thankfully, Darragh O'Brien, as Minister for Housing, adapted that. And as a result of that now, hopefully we will see a significant, the government target is to refurbish 20,000 vacant houses around the country. These are houses in communities where they're beside schools, where the fibre optic cable, where all the services are there, water and sewage, that can actually provide houses to families, in the coming months, rather than new houses which could take years to build.
I do want to talk about your transition into politics, which did come as a result of unfortunate circumstances, because your father, who was a senator at the time, he passed away in a traffic accident in November of 96. My understanding is that he died on his way to attend a funeral after he had left another funeral. And then 97 comes along, you're just 23 years of age, you suddenly find yourself in the Seanad on the agricultural panel after a by-election took place to fill your father's vacancy. Can you recall how it felt to step into the limelight, step into national politics under those kinds of circumstances?
I don't know about stepping into the limelight, but yeah, like I do remember that very clearly. In terms of it, I had a very short window to make my mind up. In fact, within a week or so of my father's death, there were already people looking for the nomination for that place in the Seanad, and there was a strong view within the Fine Gael party at the time. It was a minority government in terms of not having a majority in the Seanad at the time, and the government overall didn't have enough votes to elect a senator in that by-election. And the view was that the only way that they could safely secure that seat in the Seanad was that if a family member put their name forward. And I was approached by the Fine Gael party at the time to consider putting my name forward. And the way I looked at it was there had to be an election within 12 months. The government had finished its 5-year term within 12 months. I was 23 years of age, doing a PhD. You know, if I took 1 year out of my life at that stage, it wasn't going to make a huge amount of difference. But if I didn't take the opportunity, I felt I would always and ever have regretted it. So, you know, for me, it wasn't a big gamble in relation to putting my hat into the ring. I'd always an interest in politics. I'd grown up with politics. I'd been involved in student politics and with Young Fine Gael. And I knew I'd be throwing my hat in the ring for the general election. And at the time, I remember my father's director of elections, Tommy Hunt, had said to me, look, if you're lucky enough to be elected, he said, give it 20 years and get out. He said, politics today is a game for young people, not for old people. And he said, get out before it's too late. So that was always in the back of my mind. Never did I think at the time that I would serve 20 years in Leinster House. But, you know, at 23 years of age, there was far more negatives about not running than actually throwing my hat into the ring. And why not give it a lash, give it an up, see what happens. Would I be elected? I was elected and I enjoyed it. Yeah, there was frustrations at times down through the years. But I've enjoyed my time in public life. I've got great satisfaction out of it. I've achieved an awful lot. And I look back with it with pride.
I found a quote from one of your father's colleagues at the time, Pat Magner. He was a member of the Seanad. He was a long-time Labour Party activist. He passed away, unfortunately, a couple of years ago. But he said in the Seanad, when reflecting on your father's passing, he said, quote, it's a criminal waste of life that somebody aged 52 years is in his grave through overwork. We should call it as we see it. The cause is overwork. Looking back on it, do you think there was some truth to what he said?
Yes, there was, I'm sure, some truth to it. And I think people outside of politics don't realise the time and commitment that is given not just by the politician themselves, but by their families as well, in terms of what they give up. And I suppose at the time that I went into politics, you know, the average span or lifespan of a TD was probably 13, 14 years in terms of their time in politics, in national politics. Probably a decade before that, you probably could do 20, 30 years in politics. Today, it's very different. The amount of TDs that get one term or are lucky enough to get 2 terms and are gone out is far higher now today. And it's far more difficult for them as a result of that to go back into society, to go back into work. So I think today they're even sacrificing an awful lot more going into politics. And I think because of that, there's an awful lot more reluctance to go into politics. But there's absolutely no doubt about it. There is a huge time commitment in terms of being a politician in Ireland, because, you know, you're tied very much to your constituency. You know, because they're multi-seat constituencies, they're very competitive. But there's also a huge commitment in terms of family as well.
In 2017, you were injured in a cycling accident near Roscommon. An experience, you said at the time, brought back painful memories of losing your father in a road collision. How did that moment affect you, not just physically, but also emotionally?
Yeah, it did bring it all back, I suppose. It brought back the trauma of how quickly things can change. And, you know, it was like when I think back on it, how I actually came out of that particular accident, I just do not know. Somebody was definitely looking down on me that day because I happened to be rear-ended by a car. Anyone else in those circumstances would have seen that car drive over them because I landed on the road in front of the car. But luckily enough, it was an older man and he had stocked up. but at the same time there was a car coming in the opposite direction, and I had actually been catapulted into the air, so I could easily have fallen in front of that particular car. So look, I don't know, I came out of it. I was extremely lucky not to have, critical injuries. I know Kieran Cannon, a colleague of mine, had an accident a number of years later on a bike, and in terms of the scale of the accident, it was far less. He got clipped by a wing mirror, but the scale of the injuries that Kieran had were significantly greater than in my case. So, it just comes down to luck in relation to it. But yes, it did bring back the fragility of life. It brought back how quickly life can change, and it brought back the fact that my father, as I say, was only 52 years of age when he was killed in a car accident within a couple of miles of our front door at home. And my life changed, my family's life changed, all in a split second.
And stepping into your father's shoes could not have been easy. I mean, he was a well-respected man. Any values or lessons from your father that you've carried with you, you think, throughout your life and career?
Yeah, the one thing I think that I really have taken on board is he was always someone that would have actively encouraged us to think independently, to do what we think is right, and he would have supported us throughout that. And so as a politician, I never look back and said, well, look, how would my father do that? And should I do it the same way as he would have done it? He would always have encouraged us to stand on our own 2 feet and stand by our own principles and opinions. And that I did. And that has always stood to me. Yes, sometimes I've got the call wrong in relation to it. But in doing that, at least I did what I felt was the right thing at that point in time, and it was always able to let it sit comfortably with me as a result of that, rather than saying, well, look, I'm taking this decision because those that went before me would have taken this decision. That's the approach that I should take in relation to it. And then it's much harder to live with the consequences of that when you aren't doing it based on your own gut.
And then after a stint in the Seanad, you run in the 97 general election. You win a Dáil seat for the Longford Roscommon constituency, over 6,000 first preference votes. I think it was Albert Reynolds was the one who topped the poll that year. But that made you the youngest TD in that Dáil at just, you celebrated your 24th birthday, I believe, at Leinster House in June of 97. What made you decide to go from the Seanad to the Dáil and take that next step? Was it just a natural progression?
Yes, it was a natural progression. So I was co-opted to Roscommon County Council on the 27th of January 1997. I was elected in a by-election to the Seanad on the 28th of January 1997. And on the 1st or 2nd Friday in February, I was nominated as one of the Fine Gael candidates in the general election, along with the late Louis Belton and the late John Connor. And on that occasion, that June, Albert topped the poll. That was his last general election to run in. Sean Doherty and Louis Belton were the other two that were elected that day along with me. So it was a natural progression. Do
you remember what that first day in Leinster House was like? Because you were surrounded by a lot of seasoned politicians.
Yeah, I suppose, look, I'd gone to college in Dublin, so I'd been in and out of Leinster House quite regularly to meet up with my dad. So coming into Leinster House wasn't that daunting for me. However, I think when you actually sit in the Dáil chamber, it's a very different perspective than looking down on it from the public gallery. And you realise how small and how intimate it is as a chamber, which you don't get that impression when you're actually looking down on it. And I was sitting on the back row on the government benches at the time, because Fine Gael was just leaving government, and it was Bertie Ahern's first day as Taoiseach. And yeah, I did, and I looked around, and I was really lucky in that there was a lot of really experienced people in the Fine Gael Parliamentary Party at that time. A lot of people with cabinet experience that were leaving office, and a lot of people who were very willing to give advice if you asked for it. There wasn't a huge number of people banging down your door to give you advice, but if you asked for it, it was there, and it was there in abundance. And I found that really, really helpful in terms of finding my feet, developing my own political personality and ethos, so to speak, because I literally had been thrown in at the deep end. You know, I hadn't thought a lot about it. I had never intended to go into public life in terms of being a politician. It was never something that I had in the back of my mind. Absolutely, would I have gone into public service in some way? Yes, and I remember saying to actually to Simon Harris at one stage that my ideal job would have been to be the chief scientific advisor to the government. That would have been my perfect job. And in fact, he contacted me when he advertised the role now that has just been filled, to say, we've actually advertised your job. Now is your chance to apply for it.
Was there any serious conversation about
No,
it? Did
not
you
at
ever
all.
consider it? No, no,
No,
no.
not at all. You know, I'm at a very different stage in my life now. So it wasn't something that I would ever consider at this stage. But absolutely, when I was in science, I would have seen that as being my ideal job. Yeah.
Do you think starting out in politics so young gave you some kind of an advantage?
I don't know. I don't know whether it's an advantage or disadvantage. I think having experience of life outside of politics, I think, is very helpful in terms of dealing with day-to-day issues. And like, I grew up and I developed in politics, in the public eye, within the political system. And, you know, I suppose my position and view and stuff on policy and politics developed and grew with that. So I think, no, I think you would be far better to have experience outside of it. But I think it's also important that there are a mix of people, both in terms of gender and age and backgrounds, in the National Parliament. And, you know, we were a very young country and still are, but we were a really young country at the time that I went into politics. And it was important that there were young people there that were prepared to contribute to politics and prepared to give a very different perspective and maybe challenge some of the views and perspectives of some of the more established members as well.
You mentioned challenging views. I mean, after that election, 97, negotiations resulted in a Fianna Fáil Progressive Democrats coalition taking office. And Fine Gael spent a lot of your early career in opposition. How did being in opposition shape you as a young parliamentarian?
Yeah, so we did. We spent a long time in opposition. You know, initially under John Bruton, and then John Bruton, there was a change in leadership in 2001. I had joined the Fine Gael front bench at the age of 27 in the year 2000, as spokesperson in Enterprise, Trade and Employment, shadowing Mary Harney at the time. And then after the 2002 election, Enda Kenny became leader. And of course, look, the party was decimated in the 2002 election. So it was a very different party in opposition between 97 and 2002, which was a party in transition that had left office and was looking to go back into office again. Whereas the party in 2002, like, the concept of being in government was so far away from reality at the time. Like, we were struggling to be a credible opposition at that stage. And in fairness to Enda Kenny, and there was a number of us around Enda Kenny at the time that worked really hard in covering the country, engaging with the organisation initially, engaging with communities and building up the party to the strength it was in in 2007 when we did very well. We came within 2 seats of going into government in 2007, and it set the party up for the election in 2011.
Was it challenging for you though, as a young TD in Fine Gael, trying to influence policy within a big party at a time when I think it's fair to say Fine Gael were becoming more disgruntled while in opposition over the course of those years?
No, in terms of policy development, no. It was actually a really great time to be involved in policy development because a lot of the more established names had left politics. In fairness to Enda Kenny, at that time, he would have given each of his spokespersons a huge scope to develop their own policy. And I started off in transport and then went into agriculture after that, and had the opportunity to develop areas in relation to policy that were subsequently taken on in government. You know, the Origin Green concept was something that I had initially pushed as agriculture spokesperson, and it was eventually taken on by government. The National Broadband Plan is something that I had been pushing at that time in terms of bringing together all of the state-owned fibre optic cable, about developing fibre optic infrastructure, because I seen that was the future. And it was amazing to be involved in it at a really early stage in the early noughties, and then to be there at the end as minister nearly 20 years later.
One consistent theme in your career, I've noticed, is fighting for rural health. And I know that's an area that you engaged with early on. You served, for example, on the Western Health Board. You were opposition spokesman for health with a focus on primary care. Coming from Roscommon, did you witness challenges in rural health services that really motivated you?
Yeah, well, I suppose, look, health was a big political issue in Roscommon. So when I got involved in politics and ran for the general election, I took the seat of the late Tom Fox, who had been the hospital TD in Roscommon town for the 2 previous elections. And even prior to that, during my father's political career, the hospital issue in Roscommon was always a burning issue. And it was all built around the issue of rural healthcare, the fact that you were so far away from other health services, getting access to health services was so difficult. So it was something that I would have understood before I went into politics. It would have been a core part of the issues in my own constituency. But I think, as well as that, because I came from a scientific background, you know, it was much harder to maybe apply science to many other areas of policy. It was very easy to do it in the whole healthcare area. So it was also a natural way for me to develop as a politician as well, in terms of taking my scientific understanding and applying it to policy. The easiest place to apply it to was in healthcare policy. And yes, in terms of my focus on healthcare policy, it would have been very focused on rural healthcare, on the challenges faced by rural communities, about ensuring that services were brought as close as possible to people's homes. And I suppose, you know, later in life, in terms of bringing fibre optic cable to people's homes, it is a way of actually delivering health services locally. And I think we're at a really exciting time in Ireland now in terms of e-health and technology. And I think we will see over the next 5 to 7 years significant progress being made in this country in terms of transforming our health services, in terms of electronic records, but also in terms of the delivery of healthcare as close as possible to people's homes through the use of technology.
But you touched upon their recruitment issues, retention issues in some of these remote areas. And we're hearing now about doctors saying they don't want to go to rural Ireland because they're not, for example, being guaranteed holiday leave.
Yeah, so in terms of GPs, it is a huge problem in terms of providing that level of support. But I think technology is a way now that can actually help to mitigate that. You know, there are now in this country a number of remote GP clinics operating in the private sector at the moment. I see that potentially extending into the public sector to support GPs that are in small practices operating on their own. And I think because of what has happened with COVID, because of the development of technology, I think people in rural areas will be more accepting of talking to the GP via the screen rather than in person. While I think absolutely the in-person engagement is the gold standard and should still be the primary way of doing that. I think that people will accept that, well, look, if the GP is on holidays, I am prepared to talk to a GP remotely via a screen if I need to see them. And I think technology can help to address some of those problems in terms of recruitment and retention for GPs and healthcare professionals in rural areas.
Sticking on healthcare issues, you advocate as well for those with rare diseases. You once said in the Dáil that, quote, rare diseases are not actually that rare. And you pointed out that Ireland often lacks the full expertise to treat many rare conditions. It was early this year, a national rare disease strategy was published, which seems to be very much focused on innovation. Do you believe that marks a meaningful shift, or are there still some fundamental gaps that remain unaddressed in your mind?
Well, look, there's always going to be gaps in healthcare, but I think the rare diseases strategy, I think the primary objective now has to be to actually deliver on the strategy that's there. And I remember, John Bruton saying to me at one stage, getting something accepted in principle and getting the line in the estimate in the vote of a government department is much harder than actually then getting more investment put in. Once you get the reference put in, first of all, the fact that we have a rare disease strategy now, which we hadn't had for a number of years, I think is very positive. Now it's about delivering on that. Will it do everything? Absolutely not. But if we can deliver on what's set out in that, we'll go a long way to progress the needs of patients in this country with rare diseases. And how I got involved in the whole issue of rare diseases, which is back in the early 2000s, was because someone came to me and explained to me that Ireland has the highest incidence of rare diseases in Europe. We're an island nation. We had a pretty uniform gene pool, let's say, to pull from. And like there hadn't been a lot of diversity in terms of foreign nationals moving and living here in Ireland at that stage. So because of that, we had a constrained gene pool, which led to an increase in the number of rare diseases. For example, we have the highest rate of cystic fibrosis, I think, in the world. We have 1 in 5 children in Ireland have asthma, even though that's not a rare disease. We have a very high frequency of asthma in Ireland. So Ireland has a high frequency of rare diseases. And the west and northwest of Ireland, which I represented, had the highest incidence of rare disease in Ireland, again for the same reasons. So it was a natural issue for me to deal with. And sadly, over my political career, I've come across quite a number of families that have been battling getting access to a diagnosis, first of all, and then access to treatment in terms of rare diseases. And I think technology is helping. Now we have networks of clinicians who, some of them are based in Ireland, but based all over Europe. And this is something very positive that has come out of the European Union, where we have these specific networks built around medical conditions, where we can share and learn from what's happening in Italy and in Spain and in Germany to actually apply it to managing a rare disease in Ireland. We don't have to have all the expertise here in Ireland. And I think the same thing needs to happen in terms of the delivery of healthcare in rural areas. You don't need to have all the expertise in the local health centre. What you need is to have the technology and the network there that you can access the supports that are needed for particular patients, so that they're not travelling, but they're getting access to the best possible healthcare as close as possible to their own home.
I can recall during my time in radio, we spoke about long COVID, and you're one of the earliest voices to raise concerns about it and the need for proper recognition and care pathways. But now in 2025, we're still hearing stories of long COVID patients. They feel abandoned and are still enduring those very agonizing symptoms.
Yeah, and I think there's a number of problems here in terms of long COVID. First of all, uh, quite a lot of clinicians felt it was a figment of people's imagination. And even publicly acknowledging it like I did in the National Parliament, at least helped people to realise that, look, this isn't something in their minds, even though this is what they were being told by doctors, that this was a real condition. And as we do know now, there's a lot of research out there that is showing this as a real chronic illness. The other thing is that the incidence is much higher among middle-aged women than it is under any other cohort of the population. And they were being dismissed because it was women that happened to be coming to the doctor saying they had this particular condition. And that double level of dismissal, I think, really impacted on a lot of patients, really frustrated them. They knew there was something wrong, but yet they were being told that it was all in their head, it was all in their mind. So even by me going into the Dáil and raising this with the Taoiseach and questioning him, it gave people at least some level of acknowledgement that at least there's someone talking up about it. And I was lucky to be able to commission the Library and Research Service here in Leinster House to carry out research paper on what was going on elsewhere in the world in relation to it and publish it, so that people could actually see that there was some evidence emerging in relation to it. And it is frustrating that we're now, 5 years down the road, nearly 6 years down the road, and yet it's not being addressed, because what was clear to me was, by putting the supports in place to address long COVID today, it was also putting in place the supports that were needed for other chronic conditions associated with viral infection. So post-viral conditions, ME being one of them. But we're now finding out in terms of other medical conditions that there may be a viral element in relation to it, in terms of the likes of Parkinson's, Alzheimer's. The research is only starting in many of these areas, that there may be a viral element in relation to it. So by establishing these clinics that are going to treat patients with long COVID in the short term, we're also establishing clinics that in the medium and longer term are going to deal with other post-viral conditions, which I think are going to become a far more prominent element of chronic illness into the future. And all of the predictors are telling us that in terms of healthcare, chronic illness is going to be the single greatest burden on our healthcare systems in the next 20, 30 and 40 years. And actually, here's an opportunity for Ireland to get ahead of the curve, to put really effective clinics in place that can help manage some of these conditions in the longer term, ensure that people have a better quality of life for a longer period of time, and as a result of that, place less of a burden on our healthcare services.
Do you think that's an issue that is being treated as a high priority by the current Minister for Health and the relevant departments?
I don't think it's being treated as a high enough priority by the medical profession. And because they are not acknowledging it, I don't think it's getting the recognition it deserves within the HSE or within the Department of Health. But would I put the blame on the Minister for Health in relation to it? No, I wouldn't put the blame there, because I think, there is a responsibility on the medical profession to acknowledge this, to look at what has emerged in terms of research elsewhere in Europe. And there is an opportunity for us to get, set the gold standard in relation to it. But the difficulty is that the medical profession are afraid that if they highlight this, that it's taking money away from some of the services that they want to see developed, that there are competing demands there. And I think that's why there's a reluctance to really flag this up.
Let's move on now to the National Broadband Plan, a big part of your story. I know it's something that you're especially proud of. Before we get to the actual plan, I mean, you were focused on broadband as far back as the early 2000s. I mean, what sparked your interest in something that, people at a time when people were barely even emailing, let alone thinking about rural internet connectivity?
Yeah, so my background to it and my interest in it was I met someone that was involved in the whole technology sector, and they uh, told me a story about the number of different publicly owned fibre optic cables around the country. So we had the metropolitan area networks, which were the loops around towns, most of which were unlit and were being unused, and a huge amount of European and public money in Ireland had been put into them. We also had then the ESB network. We had the Irish Rail network that had previously got into a lot of controversy when that network was built out around the country in terms of the new signalling system, and ended up with a Public Accounts Committee inquiry. And we had Gas Networks Ireland, or Bord Gáis at the time. They also had a fibre optic cable network. So we had all of these publicly owned networks, but none of them were being brought together. And by actually bringing those together, we could have connected up all of these networks into a single utility, which would make Ireland really attractive for emerging investment that was taking place in the whole telecoms area, in the whole internet at the time. So I had pushed Mary O'Rourke initially, and the subsequent telecoms ministers, to look at this about bringing them all under one utility. And then when we were developing the election manifesto in 2007, we had incorporated this into a project called New Era, and I think it was Broadband 21, I think it was called, was the broadband element of it, to put all of these publicly owned fibre optic cables under a single management. Where I seen the opportunity for that was in terms of having that network. You could then build out a telecoms network from that, both wireless and fibre, to improve mobile connectivity, broadband connectivity, and improve internet speeds.
If we fast forward to 2002, you get re-elected. In the lead up to that election, John Bruton was gone. Michael Noonan stepped in. He then resigned after the election's performance, or the party's performance in that election, and then entered Enda Kenny to lead Fine Gael going forward. At the time, your name was being thrown around as a possible leader of Fine Gael. Did you ever consider standing in the party's leadership election in 2002?
Well, my hat was in the ring for a few days, but no, I didn't. I didn't think that it was the role for me at the time. But it was nice to be mentioned in that manner. But I'm glad I didn't put my name forward. And to be quite honest with you, I'd never an interest in being leader of Fine Gael. I'd never been an interest in being Taoiseach ever. I always had a huge ambition to be minister. But no, and I think Enda Kenny was the right man at the right time in that position. I think he was also the right man at the right time in terms of Brexit as well. And we were really lucky to have him as Taoiseach during that time.
Your relationship with Enda Kenny, you said before that one of your big regrets was backing that 2010 heave by Richard Bruton against Enda Kenny, saying that in hindsight, perhaps it wasn't the best thing to do at that particular stage. Following then Kenny's victory in the motion of confidence, you were not reappointed to the front bench. Did you feel that was a subtle form of revenge?
But not at all, in that I knew exactly, once I had decided that I wasn't supporting Enda Kenny, I knew exactly the consequences of that. And I'd gone through that previously with Michael Noonan. I hadn't supported Michael Noonan. I had been dropped from the Fine Gael front bench at that stage. So none of that came as a surprise. I knew exactly what I was doing at that time. And I did make that comment about, that it wasn't probably in hindsight the right thing to do. And the reason I say that was, I think Enda Kenny did an excellent job as Taoiseach in terms of negotiating at EU level on foot of the financial crisis and working our way out of that. And I think he did a phenomenal job in terms of Brexit as well. And the reason that I say that is, Enda Kenny had a very unique set of skills. he was, in my time, there was very few politicians that could really work a room. Enda Kenny was one of them. The other one that I've seen do that was Bill Clinton. And Enda Kenny could work a room and have a word with every single person in that room. And that was the type of Taoiseach that we needed at European Council at that point in time. He wasn't someone that would know all the specifics and all the details, but he was the man that was able to open the door for our senior officials to get access to the people that we needed to get to. And he was able to do that in 2011, 2012, when it was critically important. And he was able to do that in 2016 as well, after Brexit. And that's what I meant by, in hindsight, looking back on it, we did have, I think, the right man in the right place at that time. And, as a result of that, it was a mistake to take the position I did. But I felt very strongly at that time. I remember on the Saturday before the leadership vote, Saturday morning I'd spoke at length with Richard Bruton. Saturday night I'd spoken at length with Enda Kenny. And I had spent all day Sunday thinking about what I was going to do. And it was a very reluctant decision I made at that time. But once I made the decision, I knew the consequences of it. I knew the implications of it. So no, I wasn't surprised with the ultimate result that I was going to be dropped from the front bench.
You say you weren't surprised, but didn't he keep the likes of Leo Varadkar and Simon Coveney on the front bench despite them voting against him at the time?
He did. And look, that was his decision in relation to it. But I knew that once I took the decision, I knew exactly the consequences of it. So it didn't surprise me. But I was pleasantly surprised then, after the 2011 election, to be appointed as chair of the Health Committee. Now, I didn't stay that long in as chair of the Health Committee, but I was, and it was a really good appointment from my skill set and something that I was really relishing as a result of that. And, it was Enda Kenny that appointed me to that role.
Back in 2016, you said that you're both professionals, but you wouldn't be going off for pints with Enda Kenny. Is that still the case to this day?
I know. I think it would be very different today now. I haven't run into Enda in recent times. And, I suppose it did come full circle in terms of Enda Kenny did appoint me to cabinet in 2016. May not have happened if I had voted the other way back in 2011. But, it's amazing how in politics things can come the full circle. And look, I really relished that opportunity, an opportunity that was given to me by Enda Kenny, and I'll always recognise him for that.
I mentioned Simon Coveney there. I mean, he was someone similar to you who was thrust into politics to replace his late father, who died in 98. Did you feel like you had a connection with him to some degree?
Yeah, naturally enough. Look, the two of us have come into politics in very similar circumstances. In fact, I was probably one of the last people ever to speak to Hugh Coveney in Leinster House, because he was actually going out the door of Leinster House, going down the corridor on the Thursday evening before he died. And we actually had a chat, because he was our agricultural spokesperson at the time, and I had been pushing a particular issue, which was science-based actually at the time in terms of farm-saved seeds. So we had a great conversation because he would have had a tillage background and would have a greater understanding of the issues at the time than I would have. And that was the last time I spoke to him, and sadly he passed away that weekend. But yes, naturally enough, look, Simon would have come into politics in similar circumstances. There was only the year between us, and we would have been very engaged with young Fine Gael at that stage. And we worked quite closely in terms of the initiatives, in terms of the broadband, in terms of reforming the semi-state companies, and the New Era paper that was produced in advance of the 2007 general election. And it would have worked quite closely with Simon on that as well.
Take us back to 2011 and the whole Roscommon hospital issue. The election comes along, big win for Fine Gael under Enda Kenny in government now with Labour. You get re-elected, of course. Fine Gael had just come to power on promises that included protecting local hospital services. Yet a few months in, the government's moves to close Roscommon's A&E. You famously broke ranks to oppose that closure. What was going through your mind as you faced that decision?
I suppose it wasn't really a decision for me. Like, I knew exactly what I had to do. I knew exactly what I was going to do. What was more difficult was in actually doing it. So the background to that was that during the general election campaign, Eamon Gilmore came to the constituency, and he went on the radio and committed to the Accident and Emergency Department in Roscommon. Enda Kenny came to the square in Roscommon and publicly committed to the Accident and Emergency Department in Roscommon. And James Riley, who was the incoming Minister for Health, had given a letter of comfort to the community in terms of retaining emergency services. And within a few short weeks of a change of government, the HSE was pushing to close the emergency department in Roscommon. So, it was very obvious for me that I didn't have any choice. I had to support the position that the government had taken prior to the election, both Labour and Fine Gael. I couldn't be seen to go back on that because it was absolutely emphatic in terms of the commitments that were given. There was no caveats or ambiguity in relation to it, but it was still very, very, very difficult for me to do it. And it was like being alienated from your own family. Like, as I say, like, I'd grown up in politics, steeped in Fine Gael. My grandfather was a founding member of Gael in Roscommon, and here I found myself ostracised from the party for standing by the party's position and the government's position before the election.
You mentioned earlier that word consequences, and the same could apply to that situation. I mean, how do you think Enda Kenny, the party leadership, handled it, though? I mean, did anyone try to dissuade you or offer a compromise beforehand?
I had met with James Riley, and I actually had put in writing what I felt would have been an effective compromise, but that had been dismissed, which would have provided the reassurance that the clinicians wanted and the HSE wanted, but would have provided access to emergency services for people locally. The only compromise that I got was from James Riley, where he had committed to postpone the decision for a month, but the decision would still be the same. So instead of the actions being taken in July, they would have been taken in August, which would have been out of the public glare in terms of the Dáil not being sitting. And I felt that wasn't the right thing to do. I think it was important that it happened when the Dáil was sitting, so that if there were issues, that at least they could at least be aired rather than when the Dáil wasn't sitting. So I wasn't prepared to take that particular option, but that was the option that was put to me. And yes, Enda Kenny and the Fine Gael party dealt with me very harshly after that. I think during that Dáil term, I think I moved offices on 5 occasions. It got to the stage that I just left all my files inside in crates because I knew I was going to be moved again. But I suppose if you look at what's happening in the UK at the moment in terms of a government with a big majority, the Labour Party there, they're finding it difficult to manage their backbenchers. And I suppose Enda Kenny would have seen what happened with Jack Lynch in Leinster House, where he had a big majority, and because of that, he found it very difficult to manage the backbenchers. And Enda Kenny was in a situation where the government had a big majority, and I suppose he had to be seen to make an example out of me. I didn't like it. I felt it was unfair, but I can see and appreciate where he was coming from.
I suppose that whole saga highlights a broader issue in politics, the tension between party loyalty and someone's personal integrity. But moving to 2016, the election comes along, you leave Fine Gael, you become independent. Voters in Roscommon seem to vindicate your stand. You topped the poll there, exceeded the quote on the first count as an independent. What was the reaction like on the ground from your constituents after you left Fine Gael? Was there a lot of support?
There was a lot of support and there was a lot of hurt as well. There was a lot of hurt because people felt that the political system had let them down and that I couldn't wield influence to keep the services open. But look, the government had a big majority, so they didn't need my vote. I didn't have any leverage in relation to it. But they also, the Fine Gael party felt hurt. Some of them because they felt that Fine Gael had left me to hang out to dry. Others who felt that I should have rode in behind the Fine Gael party, like Frank Feehan did at the time, and that I should have backed Frank. But so there was a lot of hurt there. And look, to be quite honest with you, when I voted against the government at the time, I felt my political career was over. I felt that, I would never have the opportunity to become a cabinet minister, which was always my ambition. And I really seriously considered leaving politics altogether at that stage. And I remember the late Peggy Mannion, she was a publican in the town and the square in Ballahadreen, and she ringing me up. And Peggy said to me, she said, "Remember Mr. Dillon." So James Dillon, who was from Ballahadreen, had been in Fine Gael, had resigned from Fine Gael because Fine Gael had supported the Fianna Fáil government in relation to the emergency and not getting involved in the Second World War. James Dillon subsequently became the first ever independent minister, the only independent minister at that stage in cabinet, served 2 terms as Minister for Agriculture and subsequently led the Fine Gael party after that. So I suppose she gave me a mechanism to look very differently at the plight I was in. And then, look, when I had time to think about it and I felt, well, look, I wanted to vindicate my position. I wanted to contest the next election. And I felt that 2016 for me was going to be my last election, that if I got my mandate, I had proven that, I'd taken the right position. And look, I'd leave politics as I had been advised by Tommy Hunt back in 1997 to get out after 20 years. And that was my intention at that stage. And then circumstances changed. The government was in a minority situation and there was an opportunity to go into government.
Before we get there, in the wake of that Roscommon Hospital controversy, you and a handful of other ex-Fine Gael members and senators formed the Reform Alliance, a loose independent grouping. Did banding together at that time help mitigate the challenges of being outside a party for you?
Yes, it did, because it helped in terms of pooling resources, which were very, very limited. We weren't entitled to any funding. The Fine Gael party would have got the funding for us. So getting research capacity, getting perspectives on policy proposals that were coming forward from government, all of that, reviewing legislation and coming together as a group of TDs and senators, it allowed us, to one of us take responsibility for a particular piece of legislation or a particular policy proposal and to be able to come back with options in relation to it. And I remember at that time, we would also have on a Wednesday evening invited people to come in to dinner with us in the dining room in Leinster House to give us their perspective on finance or on education or whatever the case may be. So it allowed us to be able to broaden our perspective, get additional inputs and discuss those among ourselves.
At the time, though, there was a lot of commentary that, well, if it looks like a party and it talks like a party, then surely it must be a party. But you and others insisted it was just a grouping of
a loose alliance,
independents. I mean, looking back now, why was that distinction so important to you?
Because when, like I had left or been thrown out of the party back in 2011, and if I'm correct, the others had been expelled in 2012 or 2013, I think. So about 2 years later. And I remember sitting down with them and I said to them, look, the first thing you need to do is you need to decide whether you want to map a way back into the party or stay outside the party, and whether you want to contest the next general election as an independent, or to form a new party, or to join another party, or get out of politics altogether. And I said, you need to take time, you need to think about that, because I had gone through all of those implications, and I had, over that period of time, been approached by other political parties to join them as well. And I said, look, I've taken that time, I've decided that I'm going to stand as an independent in the next general election, regardless of what else happens. That's the approach I'm taking. So for me, I was very adamant that when we came together as a group, that it was an alliance of individual TDs and nothing more than that in terms of cooperation. As you know, the bulk of that group then reformed Renua, led by Lucinda Creighton, and the Renew Party emerged from that Reform Alliance. A number of the people and the policies that had been developed within that became a Renew policy. But I had been absolutely adamant that I wasn't getting involved in another party.
A lot of people to this day still talk about political reform. They talk about different ways the Dáil can operate, or the power of the whip system. But in Reform Alliance, a couple of the proposals you had was to introduce term limits for cabinet ministers, a single term plus 2 years. You wanted to see TDs and senators be given more powers. Do you still have that mentality? Do you still believe perhaps limiting time in power would improve government accountability, improve performance?
Well, the whole idea behind that was to actually bring power back into the Dáil chamber. Because if someone that was going in as a minister was only going in potentially for a 7-year term, like it is for Secretary Generals of government departments, it would have been in their interest to ensure that there was significant power in the Dáil, because they were going to have to go back there eventually. So that it would have given the Dáil far greater role in terms of policy formulation and a far greater say in the development of legislation. That was the core behind that. And it was something that I really felt strongly about. And like I had seen it during my political career, there was only a handful of government ministers that were open to constructive suggestions from the opposition. Seamus Brennan being one of those, Noel Dempsey was another, Brian Lenihan was another that come to mind, Eamon O'Queeve. But outside of those, there weren't that many ministers that I had dealings with anyway that were prepared to take on suggestions and proposals coming from the opposition if they had merit and credibility. And the system was built that way, and the civil service wanted to remain that way because it kept the control with them and whoever the minister was of the day. Now, thankfully, because of what happened in 2016, where we had a minority government, it actually brought a huge amount of power back into the Dáil, and some of that has filtered through into the Dáil we have today, which is really great. But I remember saying to someone at the time, the one time I would love to have been a TD was during that government of 2016 to 2020, because the Dáil had real power. It was bringing forward legislation, and legislation was coming through at that stage from the opposition and from backbench TDs that had never happened before. In fact, one of those pieces of legislation I was instrumental in getting passed, and that was the ban on fracking. So it was a piece of legislation tabled by Tony McLaughlin, the Sligo Fine Gael TD, from the backbenches. And against very strong advice from my own civil servants, I ensured that legislation got passed and enacted. And one of the great things that came out of that, one was Sláinte Care. It's something that I had negotiated as part of the programme for government, that there should be a new committee established looking at planning out our healthcare system over a 10-year period that would get all party buy-in, because what was happening was every time we had a new minister for health, they were taking a new approach in terms of reforming our health services, and we're starting from square one again, and nothing was ever actually getting delivered. And Sláinte Care today is a blueprint, and Roisin Chartall did a tremendous job in steering that committee through the work that it was done. The other big reform that was done was in terms of pre-legislative scrutiny. So today now, the Dáil and Seanad has a huge role in actually what goes into legislation, because they're involved before the legislation itself is actually drafted in detail. So the Dáil today has far more influence as a result. And I think maybe some of the work that we had done in Reform Alliance back in those years helped that to happen.
After the 2016 election, you finally reached your goal. You're appointed a Minister for Communications, Climate Action and Environment, a big portfolio in Enda Kenny's minority government with support from independents. How did it feel to come full circle and sit at the cabinet table? And do you remember that meeting you had where you were offered that position?
I do. I remember it very well. And I do. I remember it very well because I actually wasn't sure whether I would get offered a position and what position I would get offered. So I remember going into being in the ante room beside the Taoiseach's office and going in and being offered it, and thanking Enda very sincerely for it. And I said, I'll do my utmost to deliver on it. But it was a huge mandate because it was communications, energy and natural resources, which had been the outgoing department. And then the Department of the Environment had been added into that. And the new department had to be created of climate action then. So it was a massive portfolio, really technically heavy portfolio. And actually, I probably was the right person for it, because coming from the background I had in science, I really thrived in that department. I enjoyed working in that department. I enjoyed working with the officials in that department and dealing with huge challenges, because we were effectively starting from a clean slate. Alan Kelly had brought through the legislation the year before in terms of the Paris Agreement. But in terms of implementation, there was nothing there. In terms of renewable energy, nothing had happened in nearly 10 years in that. So we were starting from scratch, which was a disadvantage in terms of having to build up capacity. And, you know, I found that Eamon Ryan actually announced a lot of the initiatives that I had actually started and developed. But it's also was great department that you knew that the actions you were taking today were going to have implications in 10, 20 and 30 years' time.
It was during that time that the National Broadband Plan is introduced, and every big project faces skeptics, as you know. Tell us about the resistance within government or the civil service when you were pushing that plan.
So in fairness, the National Broadband Plan wasn't my plan, and had been developed by Pat Rabbit within the Department of Communications and followed through then by Alex White after that. And I came in at a time when a lot of decisions had to be made in terms of how the infrastructure was going to be rolled out, the ownership of it, a commitment in relation to funding on it. And added to that, we had the complexity of Brexit, which created a huge amount of financial uncertainty. So there was opposition from outside. First of all, we had a number of bidders that were involved in it, some of whom subsequently pulled out, but we had other telecoms operators in the country who it would have financially made more sense for them, for the National Broadband Plan, not to go ahead, because they could make an awful lot more money if they hadn't a direct competitor, that had a state subvention, whatever that subvention was ultimately going to be. So there was always going to be commercial resistance in relation to it. But yes, it really surprised me the level of resistance within government to it. basically the view within many parts of government outside of the Department of Communications was that we should just utilise broadband backbone that we had, put up a few extra mobile phone masts for wireless broadband. But the difficulty was that the technology was developing so rapidly, the demands for bandwidth and capacity was increasing so rapidly that by the time you would have built out that infrastructure, it would be obsolete. And that had already happened with the previous broadband plan under Eamon O'Queeve, which was a contract with Three, which was a private company, a privately owned network. And they had used mobile technology to roll out a rural broadband service. And by the time that network went live, the technology had been obsolete in terms of the demands and needs for rural Ireland were far greater. So the idea behind this was to actually get ahead of the curve, to put in infrastructure that would stand the test of time. And now it's the most modern network in the world in terms of fibre optic telecommunications in any rural area, anywhere in the world. And the objective was to bring it to every single home. And the cost in terms of bringing it to every single home or bringing it to 90% of homes was relatively insignificant in terms of the opportunity it could provide in terms of healthcare services, education, remote working. So the benefits were huge. The difficulty was we couldn't take any of those into the calculation in terms of the impact on our health service, on delivery of education, of remote working. None of those could be calculated into the benefit in relation to it. We purely had to look at it from the investment in a piece of infrastructure and the financial return out of that piece of infrastructure. And we introduced a contract concept which is quite unique, is completely unique in an Irish context, where we didn't know the final design because it was impossible to know the final design. So effectively, we were going to pay the winning bidder a price per kilometre, per delivery of connections to homes, of meeting particular timelines. And it has proven to be the right approach to take because the project's going to be finished on time and it's going to come in about €350 million ahead of budget. So there's actually going to be money paid back to the taxpayer in terms of this particular contract. And there's not too many public contracts anywhere in the world where actually the contractor is handing money back to the state at the end of the build out of the project. But I think it provides massive opportunities in terms of rural Ireland, in terms of using this technology in really innovative ways. But that wasn't getting across inside in government, who were purely just looking at the cost of this and really why should we be putting this sort of investment into rural Ireland. And I kept explaining that this was similar to rural electrification. You know, at the time that Ardnacrusher was built, inside in Dáil Éireann, there were TDs saying, we'll never use all of the electricity that's coming from Ardnacrusher. You know, why should we be investing so much money in a project when we'll never use all of this electricity? And the same thing was being said in terms of broadband, both inside the Dáil and in some of the government departments and by senior officials. But we eventually were able to convince the right people that this needed to happen and that it would transform Ireland. And look, it was very obvious then when COVID came that it was the right decision. But sadly, it took COVID to silence the doubters inside in Leinster House. And I hope that some of them come back and accept that they were wrong in relation to it. And it definitely silenced the doubters in the civil service.
So there's no doubt the plan was worthwhile in the long term. It didn't come without controversy. I mean, there was that situation where you chose to resign in October of 2018 after it came out that you had a private dinner with David McCourt, who was the head of the sole remaining bidder for the contract during the procurement process. In the Dáil, you famously said that the situation was, quote, more about optics than fibre optics, implying that the issue was one of appearances rather than a substantive bias. From your perspective, what exactly happened with those meetings. And did you feel that you were unfairly judged on those optics?
Yes, I did feel, and I still do feel, I was unfairly judged on it. And there were two people in the Department of Communications involved in the project who didn't have to sign a confidentiality clause. That was the Secretary General of the department and myself as Minister, because we were not part of the negotiations. We were not part of the detail in relation to it. And I remember Denis O'Brien's involvement through SiteServe at the time. I think it was SiteServe or the further iteration of that as one of the subcontractors that was involved in it. Timmy Dooley told me this on the floor of the Dáil because it had been broken in the Irish Times during parliamentary questions, and I had gone back to the officials in the department. I said, look, why didn't you tell me this? And they said, well, you're only told on a need-to-know basis, Minister, and you didn't need to know who the subcontractors were. So a lot of the detail wasn't known to me in relation to it. I was only finding out what I needed to know at particular points in time. So I think the difficulty was because of the controversy previously in the Department of Communications. There was a perception outside that I was doing something untoward. But the department had built in that particular safety net, so that accusation could never be made, regardless of who was minister. And yes, I was intently involved in that project. This is something that I had started off, 15, 16 years earlier on the backbenches in Leinster House. I understood the implications of it. I understood the importance of it. And I want to get this project over the line. This was a minority government that was coming under huge political pressure in Leinster House in terms of people knocking the project. And like the bidders were saying to me that, look, if there's a change of government, where are we going to be in relation to this? The opposition are saying that this is a terrible project. I said, they're only saying that. But I said, if they're in my shoes, they'll proceed with it. So the bidders needed to be provided with a lot of reassurance in relation to it. Did I cross the mark? Yes, I did. Do I regret it? Yes, I do. But it was purely with the intention of ensuring this project got over the line, because had David McCourt, as the last bidder in the project at that stage, if he had pulled out, this would never, ever have happened. And I was absolutely sure, because there was such a determination within the commercial sector and from some of the people within the public service that this shouldn't happen. It would never have got off the ground had he pulled out. And I was determined to make sure that he would stay in the bidding process.
So do you believe that taking that risk of attending the meeting was necessary to ensure the project happened?
I felt it at the time. Look, hindsight is a great thing. And, looking back now, no, I shouldn't have taken that particular meeting. But it was done with the best intentions. And in fairness, while quite a number of TDs criticised me at the time, all of them acknowledged that, that I wasn't someone that was trying to do it for anything other than the best intentions. And it was about the optics rather than delivering on the fibre optics.
Broadband aside, you were also involved in other aspects of that ministry. What do you consider some of your other accomplishments or initiatives that you hope won't be overlooked?
I think a lot of my other accomplishments are overlooked in that department. And I look back with real pride in actually establishing the Department of Climate Action, which has come on in leaps and bounds since then, under Richard Bruton, Eamon Ryan, and now Darragh O'Brien. Like, we had to set that department up from scratch. We did a lot of work in terms of waste. For example, one of the first things I did when I became Minister for the Environment in July of 2016 was take waste out of environment and put it into natural resources. That's all developed into the whole circular economy today, which is great. And we're seeing how we can actually look at waste now as a resource rather than a burden on our economy. All of the renewable energy auctions that are happening today, both onshore and offshore, were all of those approaches and concepts and principles were developed, and the initial EU approval and cabinet approval I secured. The support scheme for renewable heat was another complex project we got over the line. Microgeneration in terms of rooftop solar, which is a phenomenal success now. That was a huge blockage to get through the department, and we got that over the line, and that's been seen as a phenomenal success. The deep retrofitting of homes, none of that had happened until I became minister, and we really pushed that out and got research evidence to actually back it. We got the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine to do an analysis of that. So we actually have empirical scientific evidence to support the work that we're doing. Negotiated the 2030 climate and energy targets, which were really, really complex negotiations where Ireland was in a really difficult position. And so even though I was only there for a really short period of time, we got through a huge amount of decisions. I think one of the things that I really enjoyed working on and didn't get over the line, and it sadly Richard Bruton didn't get it over the line either, and it was Eamon Ryan that subsequently got it over the line, was in the whole area of air quality. So one of the reports that was on my desk when I came in as minister was the fact that 6 people on the island of Ireland were dying every day as a result of poor air quality. Here we are, a rocky island in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, and yet 6 people a day were dying because of poor air quality. And the clean air strategy, we didn't have a clean air strategy in Ireland, and I took that from concept, and actually the first draft was there on Richard Bruton's desk when he went into the department, and that was subsequently, as I say, delivered by Eamon Ryan. I really enjoy the work in relation to that. We're able to roll out monitoring stations around the country, which people can look at live now to see their air quality. And I seen that really as a way of starting the whole decarbonisation of our economy, because if we could take fossil fuels out of our heating and energy systems, it automatically improved air quality in the country. And the National Dialogue on Climate Action, where we actually started to talk to people, started to explain to people the implications of climate action, what they could do and how that could benefit them. Because up to that, and sadly during my time as minister, I got a lot of criticism from the environmental lobbyists and the environmental scientists who would literally dump reports on your desk. There's the evidence, now act on it. But would never look at, well, how does this impact on people? How can we bring people along the journey with us? And I thought it was interesting in the climate negotiations in Brazil. They have now brought people and communities very much to the fore. The realization is there globally now that you cannot reach your objectives in terms of delivering on climate action unless you actually bring people on that journey with you. This idea of, dictating to people and telling them what they can't do anymore rather than providing them with opportunities just does not work. And sadly, I think it has really set back the climate agenda more than a decade, because we have failed to engage with citizens and bring them on that journey with us.
You decided not to run in the general election of 2024 because you wanted to, quote, try something different. Was that something you mulled over for a long time, that decision?
Yes and no. As I say to you, when I went into politics, Tommy Hunt was one of the people, my dad's director of elections, who had encouraged me to go into politics. And he had said to me, look, if you get 20 years out of it, get the hell out then. So that was always there in my mind to get out after 20 years. I've always had a huge passion in terms of taking research evidence and using that in Leinster House. And I've always tried in my political career, in terms of any policy proposals that I brought forward, any amendments to legislation, to always back it up by evidence. And I remember one minister saying to me, he said, I always hated to see you coming into the committee. He said, because you always knew more than I did on the topic. And he said, you were always well researched in terms of the argument you were making. He said, never bothered me about anyone else, but I always hated to see you coming in. And I overheard an official one time coming into a committee, and he said an expletive under his breath. I said, look who's after arriving now. And to me, they were two badges of honour. And I always tried, not to look at politics from the point of view of opposition for the sake of opposition's sake. I always try to put forward constructive proposals, but constructive proposals backed by evidence. And I think in democracy, not just in Ireland, but across the world today, that is really missing. There is a lack of trust in politicians. As a result of that, people are moving to the extreme left and the extreme right because they feel the middle ground hasn't delivered for them. And yet, in science, technology, innovation and research, there are so many solutions to the practical problems that we're dealing with in terms of healthcare, agriculture, housing today. So what I'm doing now, and what I've always had a passion for and always wanted to do, is to help to bridge that gap between the innovations that's been developed in our research institutions, in our universities and in our private companies, and translate that into really practical policy measures that the politicians and the civil servants can implement to make a real difference in communities right around this country and right across our planet.
A few final questions. First of all, in a surprising turn of events, you rejoined Fine Gael last year after well over a decade on the outside. Tell us about that decision. I know your late brother John was a big reason why you did that.
Yeah, so my late brother John had remained within Fine Gael. He was a councillor, a Fine Gael councillor in Roscommon County Council. John had remained in Fine Gael at the time and had taken a lot of pressure to stay in Fine Gael. There's a lot of pressure on him to follow me and leave the party. But while there was clear commitments in relation to Roscommon Hospital, there was a real fear, and there's still today a real fear, that the next for the chopping block was the emergency department in Portiuncula Hospital in Ballinasloe. And John lives in my home, is just outside Ballinasloe. And he felt by staying within the party, it provided him with leverage to say, look, that if you do anything to Portiuncula, I'm going to walk. And that it would be far more profound to see, him leaving the party at a second level and a second stage if there was a threat to Portiuncula Hospital. So he had remained in the party at that stage, but he had often said to me, he said, I can understand why you left. He said, I can understand why you haven't rejoined the party, but he said, I would really love to see you back in Fine Gael again. And John was very much of that view, I suppose. Look, as I say, our family is steeped in Cumann Gael and that whole tradition of Fine Gael. And that was always something in the back of my mind. And then John had decided to run for the general election. And he'd only decided long after I had decided to leave politics. And I had said that if he'd got the nomination as the Fine Gael candidate, that I would rejoin Fine Gael, that I would work with him and work with the party to get him over the line. Sadly, that didn't happen. But I felt that I had made my mind up to do that. I know that it was something that was his fervent wish. And because of that, I wanted to fulfill that for his memory more than anything.
Of course. And for you personally, did it feel like a homecoming of sorts?
No, not really. For me, that was my motivation behind it. It was very much for my brother. I think it would have been a homecoming if he'd been around, and we probably would have laughed and joked over it because he had served 21 years on Roscommon County Council in the month that he passed away, and it would have been a great time for him to celebrate that, launch his election campaign, and me rejoining the party. But that just wasn't to be. And look, life throws you curveballs and you have to take them as they come. But because of that, and I had already made my mind up that I felt for his sake I would do it.
You've talked about before how what brings a smile to your face is when you pass by projects in your constituency that you know that John would have been proud of you.
Yeah, and like there's a lot of stuff that he would have been very involved in and very passionate about locally, in terms of Monksland, which when my father was a politician, Monksland was a small community on the edge of Athlone. Today, Monksland is a town in its own right. The second biggest town in County Roscommon, the industrial base of the county, one of the biggest biomedical hubs in the country. And, John would have been involved in a project that I'd worked on in terms of developing a digital enterprise hub there. He'd been very involved in developing a new community centre, which is now gone to planning permission, and a new community park there, and many other projects around the area. So there are times that I'd be passing through the local communities and I'd be looking at those projects, and I do still every single day smile and think about the difficulty there is in getting these projects over the line, the struggle that's involved with them. But for everyone that's in politics, it's the satisfaction of being able to achieve that. And, most of us in politics, that satisfaction is in relation to one individual or one community. To actually have something physically there that's going to stand the test of time, not all of us get that opportunity to have something like that. John got that. I did with the National Broadband Plan. I drive along today now and I see the fibre cable in the most isolated rural areas, and I smile to myself, and I look forward to seeing how that's going to be utilised by the young generation coming up now. What are they going to do to turn that tool into whatever it's going to be tomorrow? And I think, John was very much involved in the community, involved in developing community infrastructure, and that'll stand the test of time too.
Now that you're back under the Fine Gael banner, if I may, can I get your thoughts on the current leader, Simon Harris? I mean, you spoke earlier about how during your time you felt a lot of politicians were focused on the problem and not the solution. Do you believe that he's an exception to that?
Look, Simon Harris is the leader at the moment. Going back to my comment that I made earlier in relation to Enda Kenny, it was with huge reluctance that I did what I did at the time, because I feel you should be loyal to your party leader, and it really went against the grain for me to do what I did at that stage. And I think Simon Harris has a very difficult job as party leader at the moment. It's a very challenging time to be in government. I think politics as a whole has changed dramatically. Society is changing. The government itself really needs to focus on solutions now. I think Simon Harris, coming from his background in health, coming from his background as being Minister for Enterprise, Minister for Higher Education, Science and Innovation, I think it is a good position now to see some of those technologies applied in some of those solutions. And I think Micheál Martin as well. Micheál Martin is someone who feels very strongly about that as well. And I think they actually are a good balance, both of them, in terms of providing the leadership. I think the struggle has been to put the infrastructure in place to do that. I think we now have a chief scientific advisor. I was earlier this week at a conference where the civil service within the Department of the Taoiseach are very anxious to see more research feed into public policy. And I think we're at a really exciting time. And I think those two people in particular will provide the type of leadership that is needed to drive that particular approach forward.
Tell us about what you've been doing lately. I mean, you've been staying busy since stepping away from frontline politics.
Yeah, so I've involved in the consultancy business now, really working in that niche of supporting researchers, both in public and private institutions and in the private sector, in helping them convert their innovative solutions into policy proposals, and doing that here in Ireland. in other parts of continental Europe and at European Union level. I've worked over the last 4 years with the Interparliamentary Union, which is like the United Nations for parliaments, and I chaired a committee there of 21 members of parliament from around the world that have been looking about how we can feed more academic research and scientific research into the policy making process. And now we have the opportunity to actually do that on the ground, taking research and converting it into policy, ensuring that it's implemented in budgets, but most importantly, have an impact on people's day-to-day lives.
And finally, when you look at your life right now, what are 3 things that ground you in gratitude?
Oh, well, I suppose, look, I think to be healthy and happy, I think is by far the most unique experience to have for anyone. And it's really, really hard in today's society. I think particularly post-COVID, in terms of many people, even in this city here in Dublin, feel lonely and isolated. And, you know, to have your health, to be happy and have a good network of friends and family, I think there's nothing more to be happy about than that, and to have gratitude for than that. And I think that's something I'd wish on every single citizen in this country and across the planet. And, you know, I think we're really lucky in this country to have a society that's so built around community. The difficulty is today, yes, we still have a huge number of people that feel lonely in this country. And I think it's something I was talking about even only earlier this week. We need to see now how we can help those people to come out of that shell of loneliness that they're in, break out of it, and engage in their own communities, because there are so many opportunities out there in terms of education, in terms of community initiatives to get involved in, volunteerism, and it's just to take that step forward to let that happen for them. And I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges that we have as a society here in Ireland today.
Denis Naughten, thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching this episode with Denis Naughten. If you enjoyed it, give us a like and subscribe on YouTube. You can also follow us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and follow us on all social media platforms. Until next time, thanks for being part of the conversation.